Welcome to P5. My name is David Laws and I am a lecturer at LSBF and I've been teaching P5 for more years than I care to think about, to be perfectly honest with you. The idea behind this session is simply to give you an idea of what P5 is all about. Now, P5, the idea behind it is very, very simple. We are trying to think about the performance of an organisation. Advanced performance management is basically what we're talking about. So I suppose I'd better put ADV for advanced in there. Now, it follows on from the performance management paper, F5. In F5, you will remember that lots of the things that you did were doing things like variances. Yeah, you used to have labour efficiency variances, and you used to have material price variances and material usage variances and fixed overhead capacity variances, and then you had operational variances and you had planning variances, and you basically got sick of doing variances, didn't you? What was the point of all that? Apart from to pass the exam. Well, the point of doing all that variance stuff was that if you're running a company, you need to know what's going well and what needs fixing. So if there is an adverse variance in a department, they need to find that out and they need to fix it. Fair enough. If there is a favourable variance, they need to find that out and perhaps they can find out why they've got a favourable variance and then repeat it somewhere else, repeat it in another department. So in F5, it was very much about operational things, day to day, week to week, month to month. Here we are running a business, spending some money. Are we spending too much? Now that's fine, and that's what F5 is about. But what P5 is about is it's strategic. This is why it comes after P3 and not before it. So we're still talking about we're still talking about performance management, but instead of looking at it as a particular department, how much are they spending on material? How much are they spending on labour? What we're talking about now is we're talking about an entire organisation. Now, how do you know if an entire organisation is doing a good job or not? Well, sort of things that we'll be looking at in P5. You will have to decide what is it that you are actually going to measure. Now again, in F5, you measure financial things, particularly you measure costs. We spent this amount on raw materials. We spent this amount on fixed overhead. So a lot of it is based around costs. But in P5, we look at the fact that there's other things that you might want to mention. So, for example, one of the big areas of the syllabus, are there any non-financial performance measures that we can look at? For example, how do we measure quality? How do we measure whether we're getting the most out of our staff? How do we measure whether we're making maximum use of our assets? How do we measure whether we can cope if demand goes up or if demand goes down suddenly? How do we measure our ability to deal with these things? Now, they may well not be financial, but they're obviously important if you're going to run a business successfully. So F5 particularly is about looking at what's called the efficiency of a business. Again, a lot of it's to do with spending, a lot of it's to do with costs. P5 does look at efficiency. Don't get me wrong, it's in there, but P5 also looks at what's called effectiveness. Are your customers happy? Are your suppliers happy? Are the workers happy? So for a business to be successful, I would fully accept that they need to be efficient. You're not going to get any argument from me on that. But they also have to be effective. They have to be doing the right sort of thing. And so P5, how will we know if we're doing that? What will we measure? So what will we collect information on? And then once we've got that information, what will we do with it? So it's a wider paper than F5. F5 probably seemed really, really, really hard when you were doing it. When you're doing P5, you will realise that F5 is actually quite narrow in the kind of things it asks you to do. P5 is much broader. So we're going to be talking about strategy. It's a strategic paper coming after P3. So one of the big questions is going to be, what should we measure? One of the big questions in P5 is going to be, what should we do next? Those of you that have done P3, and everybody doing P5 will either have already done P3 or is doing P3 at the same time. It is not an advisable idea to do P5 without having done P3. In fact, I don't think the ACCA even let you do that. Everybody who's done P3 will have heard of ANSOF. So ANSOF tells you what kind of things you could do next. You could do product development. You could do market development. You could diversify. So there are different things that you could do next. Now, in P3, we tend to be simply told, this is what the company is thinking about doing. Do you think it's a good idea or not? Well, in P5, we will need to do some detailed calculations that will help us to make an informed decision as to whether we do it or not. So in P3, it's all a bit general. They will say, well, it fits in with the strategy. And they will say, yes, they've got the resources to do it. And yes, it's going to be acceptable. Whereas in P5, we might have to calculate how profitable it's going to be. We might have to calculate something like a net present value. So, is it actually a good long-term project? We will have to do numbers that will support the decision-making process. So in other words, we will have to do numbers that help them to decide what their strategy is going to be. So there will be quite a lot of calculations in P5. Another big area of P5 is to do with motivation. Now, motivation is something you should remember from P3. You might even remember it from F1. But motivation is about getting people to do things that they wouldn't really want to do given half a chance. So in other words, you could turn up for work and you could do as little as you possibly can. You do just enough to not be fired. Some of you may think, yeah, that's what I do already. That's not my business. So the idea then is you could turn up and do as little as you possibly can. Motivation means that you go to the office and you try harder. You work harder, you stay late, you take work home, you make sure that everything is done properly. But whatever happens, you are motivated to work hard. Why? Why should you bother putting in extra hours at work? Why should you bother taking work home? Why should you try hard when you could get away with doing very little at all? Motivation is about how we get people to work hard. Now, let's be honest about this. For most people, it's going to boil down to money. If I reward you in some way, if I give you a bonus for achieving a target, if I give you a reward for doing something, you will work harder. Now, one of the big things in P5 then is, what What should be rewarded? What do you actually reward people for doing? Well, surely one of the things that you reward people for doing is taking actions, doing things which help the organisation. Yeah, but how are people helping the organisation? Tell me what I can measure that you are doing. What can I measure that you do that helps your organisation to be better? What can I physically measure? Is there a percentage I can calculate? Is there something I can measure? Because if I can't measure anything, it's actually going to be very difficult to reward you. Now, this is incredibly important. It's incredibly important in companies. What happens if you reward the wrong thing? If you reward the wrong thing, people will act in the wrong way. If they act in the wrong way, the company will be unsuccessful. Now, this is this is an incredibly important thing. One of the things that we'll talk about on the course is, as most of you will know, the world, certainly Western Europe, North America, most of the Northern Hemisphere, has gone through a fairly difficult time over the past few years. You will have come across it being called things like the credit crunch. So that's one name for it. There are other names for it, but basically there have been some problems in the worldwide economic environment and have caused untold misery and problems for thousands of companies and millions of employees. And most of it, not all of it, I fully accept that, but most of it can be traced back to the actions of banks. Now, please do not think that the entire course is going to be taken up by criticising banks. That's not going to be the whole course, maybe bits of it. But one of the problems that now has been identified is that the people working for the banks were being rewarded in the wrong kind of way. Now, there's been a lot of criticism of the banks, and they've said things like banks were careless about who they lent money to. So they lent money to people who couldn't pay it back, so they ended up with massive amounts of bad debt on their balance sheets, on their books. Now, if you say a bank has lent money foolishly, a bank has lent money recklessly, that is a completely meaningless statement. Banks don't lend money to people. The employees lend money to people. So when they say banks lent money to people who couldn't afford it back, couldn't afford to pay it back, what they actually mean is the employees of the bank lent the shareholders' money to people that didn't pay it back or wouldn't be able to pay it back. Now, why did they do that? I cannot imagine that anybody working for a bank sat down on a regular basis and said, I know what I will do. I will lend money deliberately to people who can't pay it back because that will bring the bank to its knees. That will bring most of Western capitalism to a point where there's a danger of the whole system collapsing, which is the point that they got to a few years ago. I can't imagine anybody deliberately doing that. So why did they lend money to people who couldn't pay it back? Because of the way they were being rewarded. That's why. So P5 is all about how you reward people, or one of the big things is how you reward people and what effect that has. So it links back to what we've already said. We have to decide what to measure. If we can't measure it, we can't reward it. Once we've decided to measure it, then we have to decide how we're going to reward people. Are we going to reward people for meeting targets? If so, how high are the targets? So the kind of things that we need to think about. For example, imagine that you've set a budget and you measure actual performance. Now, what happens if your actual performance is worse than the budget? Should the employees of the company get a bonus or not? The obvious answer is no, they shouldn't. The budget was there, actual performance is down there. However, what happens then if we've done better than last year? particularly what happens if the outside world has changed since the budget was set. Now, in P3, you'll remember talking about things like Porter's Five Forces. You'll remember talking about things like PESTLE. You'll remember talking about things in the outside world and how they affect you. So, the budget is set, the targets are set when everything looks great, but then everything in the outside world goes to pieces. The economy goes downhill, the government puts in lots of legislation, making it hard for you to operate. Social changes happen very quickly. Nobody wants your products. There's lots of new entrants, blah, 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 blah. All these things happen, all of them making the poor manager's life a nightmare, and they fail to meet the budget. Well, under the circumstances, they might actually have done an incredibly good job under incredibly hard circumstances. So, do they still get a reward? That's one of the things that we need to think about in P5. Another thing that we need to think about potentially in P5 is there's the budget, there's the actual, and you've done worse than the budget again. But you've done better than your rivals. Your sales have gone down by 10%. The budget said sales were going to go up. Actually, they've gone down, and they've gone down by 10%. But your rivals have lost 50%. Should the managers now get a bonus? Because, all right, they haven't met the budget, but they've done better than everybody else has. So these, again, are the sort of questions that we are going to be thinking about in P5. We're going to be thinking about, although it says budget, and most of you will imagine that I mean a budget meaning financial information. So a budget would be how much money you have to make. So a budget would be budgeted profit, a budget would be budgeted revenue, a budget would be budgeted costs. There's nothing to say that we can't have non-financial things in there. You could have budgeted customer satisfaction. That could work. So you could say we didn't meet the budget, but we did better than last year. So P5 is all about these kind of things, and it's a strategic paper. If every single employee in our organisation is being encouraged to do the wrong thing because of the way they're rewarded, our strategy is doomed to failure. So in P3, we come up with, here's what the company strategy is, and in P5, we could actually completely undermine it and make it so that the strategy won't work because of what we reward. There could be a key element of our strategy. There could be something that, in order for our strategy to work, we've really got to get right, and yet nobody's measuring it. So, if nobody measures it, we won't know if we're being efficient. We won't know if we're being effective. And if we don't know those things, well, then we can't fix them. So, P5 is a very wide-ranging paper. There's a lot of different areas that are in P5, and one of the things that students struggle with, I think, with P5 is how it all fits together. So one of the things that I do on the course is I talk about how everything fits together to make it a little bit more sensible. But that's basically what P5 is. It's real life. All of you who are working work for organisations that have to be efficient and have to be effective. They have to know they're being efficient, and they'll only know that by measuring things. They have to know they're being effective, and they'll only know that by measuring things. They will have to reward people for doing a good job, but they'll have to work out what does a good job mean and how can we measure it. And once we measure it, how do we set a target? And once we have a target, how do we reward people for meeting it? There will also be other things that they could do. Should we do market development? Should we do product development? Should we diversify? And somebody will have to do some calculations to say yes or no. So this is what goes on inside your organisation. It's what goes on inside LSBF. So the idea then is that in P5 we will be acting as a senior member of the board of directors, probably the finance director, trying to put a financial perspective onto all of these things. So we'll be looking at how the management accounting department particularly can help with all of these. Now, in particular, as far as the live sessions are concerned, what is it that we will be doing? Well, the short answer is that in the live sessions, my job is to do whatever it is you want me to do. Now, I am obviously only going to know that if you contact me in advance. We will have a number of live sessions scattered throughout the course. We will have a couple of them during the tuition, one round about the middle, one round about the end. Please check on the website for the exact dates and times. Similarly, when we get to the revision phase, one near the beginning and one near the end. Again, the dates and times will be published. I hope that people will contact me in advance through the email system that we have on the interactive website and say, I would like you to go through that example again from lecture 3 because I didn't quite understand that bit. Or they might say, or you might say rather, I didn't quite understand that point you made in week 4 that was on page 57 of the notes. Can you just go through that again? And if that's what people want me to do, I am more than happy to do that. It's not a problem in the slightest. But obviously, give me a bit of notice. It will make things a little bit easier. If nobody does that, or if there's only 1 or 2 things, then what I will do is I will come up with some stuff that we can look at. So, for example, if the examiner publishes any articles between now and the exam, we will go through those. Obviously, I don't know if they will or they won't. I only know about it when you know about it, when it appears on the WaveCCS website. So I'll go through any articles that the examiner comes up with. I will go through some extra questions. I will potentially go through one of the chapters of notes and add a few bits and pieces to it. So I will basically prepare what I want to do, but I'm more than happy to do what you want me to do. So one thing, if you want to get the most out of it, is let me know in advance what you want me to do. The second thing, if you want to get the most out of it, is to be able to be logged onto the system when the live sessions take place. Although you can't speak to me, we have tried that and it didn't really work because I'm trying to talk and I've got a voice in my ear and it just was a bit of a disaster. Although you can't speak to me, you can type to me in real time. It's like sending an instant message. So what I will do is I'll be talking away and then I will check to see if anybody's messaged anything and I can answer things there and then. Now, you don't have to watch it live. They are all going to be recorded. They will all be set up on the internet. But obviously, you then won't be able to ask me anything. So if you watch it after it's happened, you won't be able to do anything. So the best thing to do is let me know in advance what you want. Or, if you can't do that, or you're happy with everything, fine. Watch the session and type anything as you go along. It might be a question that's only just occurred to you. If so, I might need a few minutes to think about it. So try and put them near the beginning if you possibly can. Or alternatively, if you're happy with everything, absolutely fine. But at least make sure you watch them at some stage. So I look forward to, I was about to say I look forward to seeing you. Of course, I won't be able to see you. You will be able to see me. I look forward to contacting you, to communicating with you in a few weeks' time. So until then, I wish you good luck with the first few weeks of your studies.